Bringing out the vacuum is the sexiest thing in the entire world. Let me tell you.
I love vacuuming, by the way.
He loves vacuuming because when Scott vacuums, you know what's going to go on later on.
Thank you for joining us for the Blended Kingdom Families podcast. This podcast is for blended families, the people who love them, and anyone who just wants to improve their marriage and family relationships.
BKF exists to break the cycle of divorce, equip marriages, and unite blended families with the truth of God's Word. It is our hope that today you will receive biblical guidance and practical resources that will bring unity and peace to create your thriving, healthy home. Let's jump in.
Hey guys, welcome back to the BKF podcast. We are completing our series on sex today.
Yes.
And we've had such a wonderful time. If you haven't already, go back, check those episodes out. You can like, share, comment, send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
We talked about frequency.
Yes.
Then we talked about communication. Now we're going to kind of wrap this up and talk about enhancing.
Enhancing.
Just making it better,
Yes.
making it good, making it the best it can be.
Yes.
So what can we do? I'd like to point out, we were exploring ideas in here, and I'm in a room with all females and then just me. So all of my ideas got shot down, most of them, when it came to coming up with titles for this. So I'm just going to throw it to you first.
Okay.
So a married couple, they've got it scheduled. They've talked about it.
Yeah.
And they make it amazing.
Yeah. I think there's so many different ways that we can make sex amazing in our marriage. First, I think a lot of it just comes with just our posture and our heart, one towards our spouse and our marriage, going into our intimacy and sexual intimacy with, I want this to be amazing. I want it to be good. And I want to please my spouse and I want to enjoy it myself.
Yeah.
I think from a wife's perspective, so to speak, I think there's so many things that we can do and that we can lay down to make that experience better for our husband. I touched on this just a little bit in the first episode with frequency, but because as the wife and the mom, we have so many plates struggling, and being in a blended family, being mom, stepmom, being wife, being a career woman, if you're, a working mom, there's so many different plates that you're spinning. And so oftentimes when we get overloaded with those things, the communication with our spouse, the sexual intimacy with our spouse, those things can kind of get pushed under the rug, so to speak. And so I think a lot of times as moms, we have to just reevaluate what we're doing and what we're expensing energy on so that we can make sure that that is a priority in our marriage. So first, I would say just evaluating if you're not having enough sex with your spouse, or if you find yourself being the one that's like, oh, I'm tired tonight, I don't have the energy to do it. Look at what you're juggling. Look at the things that you're doing. And is there anything that you need to lay down that can maybe help with that? Some people, some wives, energy levels, maybe it's hormonal, maybe it's a health issue that we're dealing with. So just really taking a look and evaluating that. I think another thing that wives can do is, when women feel beautiful, they act differently. And so I think a lot of this comes with, making sure that we're dressing ourselves up and, making ourselves attractive for our husbands and, putting on makeup. If it were up to me, I would wear joggers and a light blonde t-shirt and tennis shoes with my hair up in a ponytail every single day because I'm a boy mom.
Yeah. And I will say, even when you're like that, you're beautiful to me.
Absolutely.
But I do notice when I'm like, whoa, you're a little dressed up here.
Well, and you feel differently too.
Yeah.
When I'm not wearing I call it my grungy clothes. When I'm not wearing my grungy clothes and going a million miles an hour, because that's usually what I'm doing when I'm wearing those clothes. And I put on nice clothes and I do my hair and I do my makeup. Man, I feel different, and I feel different about my body. A lot of women have body self-image issues, and so some people may be struggling with that. So another thing that I do is I try to take care of my body. I work out and do things like that, and so I think as wives we can start with just little practical things like that. What are we doing to physically feel better, maybe to physically look better for our spouse? What are things, that we are doing in our spiritual life, our prayer life? What is our heart and our posture towards our spouse and our marriage? And two, just looking at our energy and the time. Are we making sure that we're creating time and having that intentional time for our spouse?
Yeah. And if you're a husband and you're listening to this, because I'm going to speak from the husband's perspective, and if you're a wife and you want to forward this to your husband, please do. The first thing I would say to any husband who's listening is understand that our wives are not built like us.
Yeah.
They're just not. You may look at your wife and go, why are you so crazy about all this stuff? Why are you stressing about all this stuff? Why does this bother you? Why can you not compartmentalize like I can? Why can you not leave it at the door? Why do we They're not built like us. They're just flat out different. And we, as their husband, need to understand that God equipped us very differently. So we can use that as a weapon tool. We can be like, why aren't you like this? Or we can use it as a tool to help, which is really what we are. We're helpers. We're helpers to each other. Women have the ability, wives have the ability to help us in certain ways. Men, we have the ability to help in other ways. So if you've noticed that your spouse, your wife is struggling in areas, pick up the pace and take some things off her plate. I'll never forget. It was a couple weeks, maybe a week ago. We got home from church, and I walk in the house, and it was like my wife you were a different person, and I realized I'm like this realization. All men know this realization. When your wife realizes that the house is dirty and it's a mess, and her life is a mess right now, and she starts cleaning, that is note to get the vacuum. That's what you do. You get the vacuum, you start unloading the dishwasher, you do whatever you got to do. Because I just grabbed the vacuum and started going to work.
You did, and you didn't say a word. You just started vacuuming.
We see these opportunities every single day. So yes, if you want your wife to be sexy or be in a sexy mood or have sex more often, you've got to be willing to take things off her plate. We've got to be able to help around the house. We've got to be able and willing to be the servant when we're at home.
Yeah.
A pastor gave a message, and it's funny how I've listened to 1,000 messages, but certain ones stick out to me. But this pastor elevated the fact that when he gets home from work, he puts on a different hat, but it's still the same servant hat.
Yeah.
It's a different hat, but it still says servant. So he knows when he walks in the door, it's time to serve. So these are things that we do that enhance our spouse.
Yeah.
They enhance the ability to connect physically to each other.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And, the same goes for wives as well, to your husbands.
Yeah.
I know when you get home, or, I know that, maybe you and your spouse, you've really struggled with, you're like, man, we haven't had sex and it's been like a week or something like that. And that it's something you need to do. Like, that you're like, man, I know that this is going to draw us closer if we do this and if we do it regularly. And so it's maybe as a wife creating that time or creating that atmosphere, a lot of times, like making sure the home is a safe place, making sure that it's a comfortable place, and providing that for your husband. The kids can be wild and crazy when you get home, but maybe it's that you've done the homework already. You've taken care of all those things so that when your husband gets home, you have time to engage and talk and relax, so that it's kind of preparing you guys for that intimate time later on in the evening.
Yeah. And also just remember, sex starts sometimes way before sex starts.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and again, I would love to say that this is like a wife specific thing, but it's really a husband too.
Yeah.
There are ways to initiate and start conversations before the morning time, or, kind of like as the day starts. Maybe that's a text message that goes across, you have your own little text message language that you use, or, whatever that is. There's a lot of fun ways to start the brain stimulating on, hey, I'm leaning toward having sex tonight, and I want to get your mind kind of on that.
Yeah.
So text message, maybe it's, some wives really like flowers.
Well, I think love languages is a big part of it. We talk about that, like acts of service, like bringing out the vacuum is the sexiest thing in the entire world. Let me tell you. I
love vacuuming, by the way.
He loves vacuuming because when Scott vacuums, what's going to go on later on, what is going down in the bedroom. Just saying. So acts of service may be your wife's love language. Maybe it's physical touch. I know there are a lot of women who, our body, so to speak, we need some of that, maybe it's foreplay, or it's the physical touch.
Term.
Yeah.
It's prime the pump.
Well, Scott used the term prime the pump. You guys, I don't know that that's
an
the
80s
best
term. Way back in the day.
But maybe it's physical touch. Maybe it's a back rub, or maybe it's, you're cuddling and watching a movie together. Oftentimes women kind of need that workup before just jumping into the act of sex. But, to your point too, Scott, like having that conversation early in the day, or doing those little small things where you're like, I know what you're throwing down when you lay the thong on the bed. I know what you're talking about.
Well, and I'm just saying, if you're a guy and, we have little kids, so they're like 6, 7, 8. So bedtime is kind of a chaotic time. You know, you walk up behind your wife, give her a nice little 5-minute massage, whisper in her ear, you just relax. I'm going to go put these kids to bed.
Ooh.
And I'm telling you, magic happens right then.
And you do the baths.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You
Ladies.
do the baths and you put them to bed, make sure the door is locked. I mean, and again, these are things at home. You can also, we're talking about enhancing your intimacy. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So get away.
Yeah.
Take some, whether that is
staycation.
across the street to the hotel, or, you know, a nice weekend apart. I mean, you've got to take that time to do that.
Well, and I think, you know, something that women can do as well is initiation. I know we have a lot of men that reach out that they want their wives to initiate sex more, and it's one of the mega needs of men as well. And so, you know, maybe, you know, a lot of times, you know, you hear of men are the ones to start sending the text messages or, you know, touch first or, you know, kind of initiate it. But wives, when we can go there first and start initiating it, that can be very sexy to your spouse, to your husband. And so, you know, when you can take the step to do that, I'm sure, you know, it can go a very, very long way for them.
Well, and a little goes a long way there.
Sure, absolutely.
And men don't get that very often because we're naturally the aggressors.
Right.
I think, you know, if you looked at general marriage tone and toner, it would say the men are generally going, hey, let's have sex, or hey, let's, you know, and so when you reverse that, it's extremely attractive because men want to feel desired too.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of times that, you know, people put, you know, men into boxes and they say, well, they just want the physical act of sex. And that's not really the whole story. God created us very uniquely and also with a lot of tentacles. So we want to feel desired. We want to feel respected. We want to feel like we know how to pleasure you. Yeah. So, you know, we talked about communication last week. We need to know it. Like, good men need to know what to do. Yeah. And they're like, hey, do it X, Y, Z. Yeah. And it does pay a lot of dividends.
No, absolutely. And again, you guys, it just is going to make your sexual intimacy in your marriage with your spouse just that much better. You know, and like we said, there's things that men can do for the wives, and it's going to look different for every marriage. You know, what you like, maybe somebody else doesn't like, you know? So that's important to have those conversations to understand what makes your spouse tick, what they like, you know, and knowing those cues, picking up those cues of like, you know what, I know that this is on your mind, like, you know, and we had a therapist say this one time that, if you're not going to do it the night, like you make an appointment to do it like the next day. So it's like, you know what, babe, I had a really stressful day. Like my mind is just not there, but I want to please you. I want to have this time together. Can we schedule this for in the morning? Like, I just want to get a good night's rest of sleep. And you know, but you make it a priority to do it.
You stick to that time.
And you stick to that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And men, I would also encourage you. You're like, hey, intimacy, you know, for women is different. So you got to plan ahead, got to make sure that you're doing your things. But at the end of the day, the one thing I do want to point out to enhancement, because this is a slippery slope. If your wife's not in the mood, don't make her feel guilty. You know, just be like, okay, hey, darling, let's take a rest. Let's get a good night's sleep. Maybe we'll, you know, go, you know, a couple of days later or in the morning. Don't worry about that. Guilt has a way of adding up really, really quick when it talks about, you know, really deconstructing the way you communicate to each other. So guilt is twice as vulnerable as any type of good communication. So if you do it, you're going to get twice the repercussion of it. Yeah. So you got to make sure that you're being sensitive to that.
Well, no, that's good, and I'm so glad that you said that because I mean, it absolutely can take your intimacy in the opposite direction, so to speak, and that's where people can get defensive. But you know, intimacy is not just sex. So maybe your husband or maybe wife is, like I said, had a really bad stressful day, and they are just not in the mood to do it. You know, maybe intimacy that night looks like giving them a back rub. Maybe intimacy that night is serving them like, hey, can I get you a cup of coffee or some tea, like a book? Like, what can I do for you? Like, you know, maybe Scott always tries to get me to massage his feet, y'all. It ain't happening. But you know, maybe
do that just because she like icks out on feet. It's just, it's really a fun game for me to do. It is a fun game.
But you know, maybe it's massaging their feet. You know, intimacy, it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. So that can look different. Maybe if your spouse is having a bad day and that the sexual act of intimacy isn't going to happen. You know, there can be intimacy in other ways that can fulfill your spouse in the moment that they're in.
Yeah. The last thing we would say is, and again, this podcast is on enhancing your intimacy. And as we reference it, we're talking about sex. But I also want to point out that and we talk about this in our book, Blended and Redeemed, there's a lot of different types of intimacy that play a role in this.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just have this physical act of intimacy if you don't have the other acts of intimacy.
Sure.
We talked about emotional intimacy, but there's financial intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy.
Yes.
And again, when you're living for a marriage that is living for God and living for keeping Him as your priority, and both of you have that goal, and if you're leaving these others out, you're not disclosing what's going on financially, or maybe you're misusing money, or you're not having a daily prayer life together.
Yeah.
I couple counsels every day. I counsel couples.
There you go.
My words mixed up.
Yeah.
Every day, and I ask them, "Do you pray together?" "Oh, no." Well, that's the most intimate thing you can do.
Yeah.
So if your sex life is hurting, look at these other areas of intimacy and go, "Can we enhance these?"
Yeah.
I go one step further with this. Ask your spouse, ask your wife, ask your husband, are these areas important to you? And if we fulfilled these areas more, would it make our sex life better?
That's good.
And I guarantee you the answer is going to be yes.
Yeah. That's good.
So, guys, this kind of rounds out what we're doing on intimacy. And again, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't watched the other episodes, or if this is something that is just kind of like tweaking, we know in marriage, sex can become an issue.
Yeah.
And it's also one of the issues that people push under the rug the most.
Yeah.
And go, well, maybe we'll deal with that another time.
Yeah.
So we encourage you, one, to go back and listen to the first two episodes in this one.
Yeah.
Also, we have some great friends, Dave and Ashley Willis with the Naked Marriage Podcast. I mean, they talk about everything sex.
Everything.
I mean, and they are hilarious.
Hilarious. They talk about, you guys, I'm talking about from orgasms to foreplay to sexual positions.
All from a Christian perspective.
All from a Christian and biblical perspective.
Yeah.
So I call them the sexperts. They're amazing. And you can check them out at exomarriage.com too.
Yeah. So, guys, love you guys. Hope you've enjoyed this, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Be blessed in all that you do.
Hey guys, so glad you were here with us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
And you can find more resources from Blended Kingdom Families at blendedkingdomfamilies.com. Join us again next time as we hang out with more amazing podcast guests. And remember, nothing will be impossible with God.